The Great Depression was one of the hardest times in American history. Jobs disappeared overnight, banks collapsed, and millions of families struggled just to put food on the table. During the 1930s, wasting food was not an option. Every ingredient mattered. Out of this hardship came some of the cheapest, most creative recipes ever made. These meals weren't fancy. They weren't cooked for taste alone. They were cooked for survival. Families learned how to stretch a few cents into full meals. A single potato could feed an entire household. Bread was reused, soups were watered down, and meat became a rare luxury. Yet despite the struggle, people still found comfort in food. That's why many of these Great Depression recipes are still relevant today. In today's world, grocery prices are rising fast. Many people are once again looking for ways to save money while still eating filling meals. Surprisingly, the solutions already existed nearly 100 years ago. One popular Depression-era meal was Hoover stew. Named after President Herbert Hoover, this dish became a symbol of hard times. It was made using macaroni, canned tomatoes, and sliced hot dogs. Cheap, simple, and filling, it fed entire families on almost no budget. Another classic recipe was creamed chipped beef, often served over toast. Sometimes called SOS, it used dried beef, flour, milk, and bread. It wasn't glamorous, but it provided protein and energy when people needed it most. Bread was never thrown away. Stale bread turned into bread pudding, bread soup, or fried bread. Even crumbs were saved. Nothing was wasted. Every meal was a lesson in discipline and creativity. Potatoes became the backbone of many Depression meals. Boiled, mashed, fried, or baked potatoes were cheap, filling, and versatile. Dishes like potato soup and potato pancakes kept families alive during the worst years. Beans were another essential food. Dried beans were inexpensive, easy to store, and full of nutrients. Families cooked bean stews, bean soups, and even bean sandwiches. Meat was often replaced entirely by beans. One surprising recipe from the Great Depression was mock apple pie. Apples were expensive, so people used crackers instead. Crackers were boiled with sugar, cinnamon, and lemon juice to imitate the taste and texture of apples. It sounds strange, but many people couldn't tell the difference. Milk was stretched by turning it into soups and sauces. Water was added, and flour thickened everything. Simple white sauces became the base for dozens of meals. These recipes weren't just about saving money, they were about survival, dignity, and hope. Cooking at home gave families a sense of control when everything else felt uncertain. Today, these meals remind us that eating cheaply doesn't mean eating poorly. With a little creativity, basic ingredients can still create satisfying dishes. The Great Depression forced people to rethink food, and those lessons still matter. In a time when convenience foods are expensive, going back to simple recipes might be the smartest choice. This is why Great Depression cooking is more than history. It's a survival guide, one that can still save you money today. During the Great Depression, was considered a luxury item. Many families could only afford it once a week, sometimes even less. As a result, home cooks learned how to make tiny portions of meat feed many mouths. This skill alone can still save people a lot of money today. One common trick was using meat as a flavor, not the main ingredient. A small piece of bacon or ham bone could season an entire pot of beans or soup. Instead of serving large cuts, meat was chopped finely and spread across dishes. Soups became the ultimate survival food. Depression-era soups were thin, but filling. Watered-down broths were packed with potatoes, onions, carrots, and whatever vegetables were available. Even vegetable scraps were saved to make stock. Cabbage soup was especially popular. Cabbage was cheap, lasted a long time, and could feed a family for days. Combined with potatoes and onions, It became a staple meal during hard times. Another common meal was poor man's stew. This dish used potatoes, carrots, onions, and a small amount of ground meat if available. If not, it was made entirely without meat. The goal wasn't luxury, it was warmth and energy. Cornmeal was another essential ingredient. It was inexpensive and extremely versatile. Families used it to make cornbread, mush, and fried cakes. Cornmeal mush, served with a little milk or syrup, was a common breakfast that cost almost nothing. Eggs were used carefully. Instead of frying multiple eggs per person, eggs were mixed into batters, soups, or casseroles. 1 or 2 eggs could stretch across an entire meal. Pancakes were not a treat, they were survival food. Depression pancakes often used no eggs or milk. Water, flour, and baking soda were enough. These water pancakes filled stomachs when nothing else was available. Sugar was rationed carefully. Desserts were rare, but when they appeared, they were simple. Rice pudding, bread pudding, and boiled custards were common. Because they used cheap staples, people also relied heavily on seasonal foods. In summer, gardens were critical. Families grew tomatoes, beans, squash, and greens. These vegetables reduced grocery costs dramatically. Nothing from the garden was wasted. Wilted vegetables went into soups. Extra produce was canned or dried for winter. Even vegetable peels were sometimes cooked. Another creative recipe was milk toast. It was exactly what it sounded like, toast soaked in warm milk, sometimes with a bit of butter or sugar. It was soft, comforting, and cheap. During this time, cooking was about endurance. Meals were repeated often. Eating the same thing every day was normal. Variety was less important than survival. Today, many people would consider these meals boring or bland, but during the Great Depression, they represented security. A full stomach meant you could keep going another day. Modern grocery stores are filled with processed foods that cost more and offer less nutrition. Depression-era cooking proves that simple ingredients can still meet basic needs. By returning to these old methods, cooking from scratch, reducing waste, and stretching ingredients, families today can dramatically cut food costs. The Great Depression forced people to become resourceful. That mindset is just as valuable now as it was then. One of the most important lessons from Great Depression cooking was how to survive without recipes at all. Many families didn't own cookbooks. Cooking knowledge was passed down through experience, memory, and necessity. If something worked, it stayed. If it didn't, it was never repeated. Measurements were rarely exact. A pinch, a handful, or until it looks right was common. This flexibility allowed cooks to adjust meals based on what they had available. That mindset alone can save money today by reducing dependence on exact ingredients. Leftovers were treated like gold. A roast on Sunday might turn into hash on Monday, soup on Tuesday, and sandwiches on Wednesday. Every transformation stretched the original cost further. One popular leftover dish was hash-chopped potatoes mixed with meat scraps and fried until crispy. It required very little and delivered a lot of energy. Hash was often eaten for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Another leftover solution was soup. Almost everything could be turned into soup. Bones, peels, stale vegetables, and even bread ends were boiled together. The result wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling. Pasta and noodles were cheap, filling, and easy to store. Depression-era pasta dishes were simple, often just noodles, fat, and salt. Sometimes a small amount of milk or cheese was added if available. Gravy was used to make food feel more filling. Even when meat was scarce, gravy made meals satisfying. Flour and fat created thick sauces that turned plain food into something comforting. People also relied heavily on fats like lard and drippings. Nothing was thrown away. Bacon grease was saved in jars and reused for cooking. This added flavor without extra cost. Children learned early about food value. They were taught not to waste anything. Leaving food on the plate was unacceptable. Hunger was too close a memory. During the Depression, restaurants were rare treats. Most meals were eaten at home. This reduced spending and increased cooking skills across generations. Stretching meals became an art. Soups were served with bread. Bread was served with butter or gravy. Small portions felt bigger when paired correctly. Some families survived almost entirely on starches, bread, potatoes, rice, and cornmeal. Protein was minimal, but energy was enough to get through the day. Rice dishes were extremely common. Rice was cheap and filling. Mixed with a little milk or sugar, it became breakfast. Mixed with vegetables, it became dinner. Even coffee was stretched. People reused grounds or mixed them with substitutes. Nothing was used only once. Despite hardship, people still tried to keep meals comforting. Food was one of the few joys available. A warm bowl of soup could provide emotional relief during dark times. Modern society often relies on convenience foods that cost more and waste more. Depression-era cooking reminds us that simplicity is powerful. Learning to cook without strict recipes builds confidence. It allows flexibility and creativity, especially when money is tight. These survival habits weren't just about food, they were about mindset. Making do, adapting, and pushing forward defined an entire generation. Today, these lessons are more valuable than ever. The ability to turn very little into enough is a skill worth remembering. The emotional relationship people had with food during the Great Depression was very different from today. Meals were not just about taste, they were about survival, family, and hope. Sitting together at the table, even with simple food, created a sense of normalcy in an unstable world. Mothers and grandmothers became the backbone of household survival. They learned how to feed large families with almost nothing. Their cooking wasn't written down, it was lived knowledge, shaped by hardship. One important strategy was bulk cooking. Large pots of soup or stew were made to last several days. This saved fuel, time, and money. Reheating leftovers was more economical than cooking fresh meals every day. Breakfast was often the simplest meal. Cornmeal mush, oatmeal, or toast were common. Protein was rare in the morning, but carbohydrates provided enough energy to work long hours. Lunches were small, especially for adults. Children were prioritized. Adults often ate less so kids could eat more. This sacrifice was common and rarely discussed. Dinner was the main meal of the day. Even then, portions were modest. Vegetables and starches dominated the plate, while meat played a supporting role or disappeared entirely. Seasonal eating wasn't a trend, it was necessity. Families ate what grew locally. In winter, canned vegetables and dried foods were crucial. Preservation skills determined whether families survived cold months. Canning became a lifeline. Home-canned beans, tomatoes, fruits, and soups lined shelves. These jars represented security. Each jar was a meal saved for later. Fruit desserts were rare but treasured. Apples, when available, were used carefully. Peels were saved. Coarse scraps were boiled to extract flavor. Sugar shortages led to creative sweetness. Molasses, syrup, or even carrots were used to add natural sweetness to dishes. Nothing went to waste. Children grew up understanding hunger. This shaped how they viewed food for the rest of their lives. Many depression survivors later became extremely careful with food waste. Community also played a role. Neighbors shared ingredients, recipes, and meals. When one family had something, it was often shared with others. Churches and community kitchens provided meals for those with nothing. These meals were simple but essential. Food during the Depression carried emotional weight. A warm meal symbolized care, effort, and survival. Today, many people feel disconnected from their food. Everything is packaged, processed, and disposable. The Depression era reminds us that food has value beyond price. Cooking at home builds resilience. It teaches patience and appreciation. Even simple meals can feel meaningful when effort is involved. The recipes from the Great Depression tell stories of endurance. They reflect a generation that refused to give up despite overwhelming odds. These meals weren't glamorous, but they carried families through the darkest years. Their legacy continues today, quietly teaching us how to survive with dignity. As the Great Depression slowly came to an end, its influence on food never truly disappeared. The habits formed during those difficult years stayed with people for the rest of their lives. Even when money returned, many continued to cook the same way, carefully, thoughtfully, and without waste. For those who lived through it, food security was never taken for granted again. A full pantry meant safety. An empty shelf brought fear. This mindset shaped how families planned meals for decades afterward. Many Great Depression recipes became family traditions. They were passed down not because they were delicious, but because they represented survival. Each dish carried a story of endurance and sacrifice. One of the most powerful lessons from this era is gratitude. People appreciated what they had. A simple meal was enough. Complaints were rare because things could always be worse. Modern life has made food convenient but expensive. Takeout, fast food, and processed meals cost far more than home cooking. Depression-era meals remind us that basic ingredients are often the cheapest and most reliable option. Learning to cook simple meals from scratch builds independence. You are no longer dependent on expensive products or trends. Flour, rice, beans, potatoes, and vegetables can still feed families effectively. Another lesson is planning. Depression households planned meals carefully. Shopping lists were strict. Impulse buying didn't exist. This discipline saved money and reduced waste. Food preservation skills are once again becoming valuable. Freezing, drying, and canning help extend food life and reduce costs. These skills were once essential and may become so again. The Great Depression also teaches humility. No one is immune to hardship. Even families who were once comfortable found themselves struggling. Food became the great equalizer. By studying these recipes, we don't just learn how to cook cheaply, we learn how to adapt. We learn how to remain human during difficult times. Many people today feel financial pressure similar to the past. While circumstances are different, the emotional stress is familiar. That's why these recipes resonate again. Great Depression cooking shows that survival doesn't require luxury. It requires knowledge, patience, and creativity. The idea that cheap food must be unhealthy is a modern myth. These meals were simple but nourishing. Whole ingredients provided energy and strength. These recipes also teach us respect for food. When something takes effort, it becomes valuable. Throwing food away becomes unthinkable. The past has much to teach us if we listen. The Great Depression wasn't just a historical event, it was a lesson written into everyday life. By bringing these recipes back into our kitchens, we honor those who endured unimaginable hardship. We also prepare ourselves for an uncertain future. In the end, Great Depression recipes are not about poverty, they are about resilience. They remind us that even in the hardest times, people found ways to survive, care for their families, and move forward. That is the true history we taste today.